Okay guys, welcome back. So with these examples, I do want you to write it down as I'm going through it. So please get a pen and paper, pause the video, or you can write it on your computer, I don't mind. However, I do want you to go word for word writing as I'm writing. You might not have the same style as me, you might not use the same words as me. However, if you are writing down the content, it's going to go into your brains a bit better. It's going to stick into your memory, I should say, a bit better, yeah? So, especially when I give evidence, if I talk about statistics here and there, this is stuff which you would need to remember. They might not give it to you in the exam. So please get pen and paper, and I go through it fairly slowly. So otherwise, if you're just going to play it and listen to it, your mind's going to drift and you're going to think of something else, which is understandable. So please get a pen and paper and write it out word for word as we are going through it. I promise you that's going to help. An example of an 8-mark evaluate question. Okay, remember the rule, the 3 triple O's, yeah? On the one hand, on the other hand, overall. So on the one hand, you're going to make 2 points there. On the other hand, you're going to make 2 alternative points. And overall, you're going to summarize them and provide a conclusion, a judgment. Very, very important. Come to a judgment. Clear. That's what they're asking for. Okay, so the question here we have, evaluate the effectiveness of the methods of response to a tropical cyclone in a named developed country. So my named developed country, our case study is the USA, Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. So the question is evaluate, yeah? Let's underline these. Evaluate the effectiveness. I think that's the key. How effective were the methods of response? So on the one hand, I'm going to give 2 reasons why the response was good. On the other hand, I'm going to give 2 reasons why the response was poor. Then I'm going to come to my conclusion. So let's see. As I'm going through this, you should be learning this case study as well. Okay? So the point of me giving you this example is to see how to structure the 8-mark questions, but also to learn the content of our case studies. So pay attention. On the one hand, a positive short-term response was that the government quickly used the army to help victims with injuries and evacuation. They mobilized 58,000 National Guards. This was an impressive and effective response to the devastating 175-mile-per-hour winds that hit New Orleans. Okay, let's carry on then. A positive long-term response for New Orleans was the financial aid given by the government. $62 billion was approved by Congress primarily for temporary housing for the victims. Although this was a positive method of response, its effectiveness was questionable as the organization chosen to distribute this aid, FEMA, did not do a good job. So I've given you 2 positive things. One is about the evacuation and that they mobilized a 58,000 guards. The other positive response was the financial aid approved by Congress. Although I had to add in there, it was questionable about its distribution. But overall, I've given you 2 positive responses, both with a bit of explanation and some evidence in there. So let's look at the other hand then. On the other hand, a negative long-term response of the hurricane was that the government's acceptance of foreign aid and help. Of the nearly $500 million offered by over 150 countries, the US government only agreed to receive 126 million, with 100 million of this coming from one country, the UAE. This could have been due to the government not wanting to appear weak towards other countries. Nevertheless, it is the poor people and the victims who suffer from not receiving the aid which was offered. Thus, the effectiveness of foreign aid could have been much better. So this is something which you can remember because it's a big deal, okay? Nearly $500 million was offered to the US in terms of foreign aid, but they only agreed to receive 126 million. So when they are offering $500 million as foreign aid, they're offering it for the victim, but the US declined to take that money. Why? I don't know the exact reasons, but I've speculated by saying maybe they didn't want to appear weak towards other countries. And on top of that, $100 million of the money that they did receive all came from one country, UAE. So very interesting facts on the response to the Hurricane Katrina by the US. So that's one point I've made there, okay, with evidence and well explained. Let's go to another point because I still have one more to complete. So another poor response to the hurricane was the fact that the 10% of people left behind in the city were primarily the elderly and poorer residents who did not own a car. Although 90% were evacuated, this was not without trouble, such as traffic jams, and the evacuation points such as the Superdome being overwhelmed and lacking sufficient supplies. So although 90% were evacuated, I'm actually saying that the response was still poor because the 10% who were left were the poor and the elderly. And even those that did evacuate, there were problems such as traffic jams and the evacuation point, the Superdome, which was on high ground, avoiding the floods and the storm. It was completely overwhelmed and it lacked sufficient supplies, food, water, medical care, etc. So I'm being very critical. You have to be critical when it comes to geography 8-mark questions. You have to put on your critical thinking and ask questions. Think like a geographer. Ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. Overall then, let's have a look. I believe the effectiveness of the response to Hurricane Katrina was poor for a wealthy and developed nation such as the USA. Millions of dollars was offered to help victims, but never reached them. Poor and elderly people were left behind in the city, and the distribution of funds passed by Congress was not satisfactory. These arguments lead me to believe the methods of response was not as effective as it should have been, especially considering the USA is the strongest economic power in the world. Done. So as you can see in my conclusion, I do not bring anything new. I just reiterate my main points from my paragraphs there. Okay, I put them together and I add it alongside my strong belief that as a developed nation, as a stronger economic power, they should have done a lot better. That is my judgment. Make it clear, make it distinct, and don't be apologetic for it. Yeah? Don't be shy. Go for it. So that's what they want to see. They want to see you come to a conclusion. Okay, that's your example of an 8-mark question number 1.